So welcome everyone to today's Know and the How presentation. Before we dive into today's webinar, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Gillian Cohen-Lee from FRRR's partnership team. I'm dialing in from Wiradjuri country in central west New South Wales. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I am on and also the traditional owners of the lands that you are on today. And thank them for their custodianship across millennia. A few housekeeping matters. I'll also, introduce my colleague Miles, who's set all this up and done all the legwork. Miles is there as well, who will be facilitating the Q&A a little bit later. Firstly, just a brief disclaimer about FRRR's legal responsibilities in providing this information to you today. Secondly, for you to know, this session is being recorded and will be distributed in the coming days. So if there are colleagues that couldn't make it, then you're welcome to share it with them. As mentioned previously, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. With the volume of people on the webinar today, it would be really helpful to put the questions in the chat in case there are any duplications, and we will ask that it would be covered later on in the presentation. But most importantly, I'm delighted to welcome Linda Tillman, founder of Tilma Group, a boutique regional tourism and events agency servicing clients throughout regional Australia. Linda contacted FRRR last year to see how she could further support remote, rural and regional communities, and I suggested that sharing her incredible knowledge about delivering events in rural and remote areas would be valuable to our community. And looking at the number of people on the call today, I think I might have been right. So huge thanks in advance, Linda, to you and your team for being here today. I'll now pass over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us live today. It's very exciting to be able to have this opportunity to connect in with so many people across regional and rural Australia, which is really the lifeblood of what we do. Is we work with people like you to really maximise the benefits that regional and rural communities can gain from tourism and events. So really, really excited to be able to share with you today. But before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and country. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders taking part in this webinar today. I'm coming to you today from Guyable country in southern Queensland, and my colleague Kath, who is on the line today, is coming to you from Wiradjuri country in New South Wales. So in terms of today, trying to prepare for this was really tough. It's like there's so much we can share. Events, it's just such a big conversation, in terms of when we talk about how do we optimise events in communities, how do we deal with the challenges that many community groups are facing in delivering successful events. So there's so much that we could talk about. So we've really tried to, condense it down to some of the key points and some of the key challenges that we are seeing consistently in the work that we do. And I guess what we're hoping to achieve today is not only for those of you on the call to really appreciate these big challenges and also know that you're not alone. I think that's really important, in particular in regional and rural communities, is know that you're not alone. I guess the key for us and the biggest thing we want to do today is to give you tips on how to turn these challenges into opportunities, and give you some inspiration as well around how others are really optimising events within their communities. So we've got some inspiration from best practice examples. And I guess ultimately that final point you can see on the screen now is everything that we do is about how to support events to actually set up foundations that enable long-term success. So I know that we've got a mix of people on the call today that are from different backgrounds within different regional and rural communities. And I guess that's local government. We've got community groups and organisations. We've probably just got interested parties, and I would imagine some organisers of events as well. So I've tried to consider different audiences and different roles that people play in community as well in determining the content we're sharing today. So we've already had a bit of an introduction, but just, I guess, to extend on that a little bit and to, I guess, give some credibility. I am the founder and developer of Tilma Group. We've been operating in the regional and rural tourism space now for over 15 years. The organisation started down in Wagga in regional New South Wales, and I'm now based in southern Queensland. But we work on projects, exciting projects, all over regional and rural Australia, predominantly with government, and predominantly it is really about how do we support tourism development. But you can't work in tourism in regional Australia without having a big focus on events. So a lot of what we do is events, and events are a real key attraction in many regional and rural communities. They're the hook, they're often the main reason that people first attend or visit a regional or rural community, so that there's that real symbiotic relationship between tourism and events in our communities. So hence why we also do a lot of work in building capacity of event organisers in regional and rural communities. And today my colleague Kath is on the line, and Kath's actually going to be monitoring the chat box. So as I'm presenting, if any thought bubbles come into your mind or any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat box, or there's the Q&A area as well. Kath will keep an eye on both of those, and if there's little things that she can contribute along the way, she will. Otherwise, we'll hold those over until the Q&A session at the end. So be as interactive as possible. And even, now it's great for people to jump into the chat box and just introduce themselves, who you are, where you're from, and perhaps what role you play in events. Because I think there's definitely a lot of value in what we can offer, but there's also a lot of value in creating those connections and meeting like-minded people. So I encourage you to be active in the chat box as I'm talking for the next 20 to 30 minutes. All right. I'll just say as well before I dive into this, I've also prepared to allow a good 10 minutes, I'm hoping at least 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, because I want to make sure that we give you exactly what your expectations are in terms of outcomes from today's session. So just be mindful of that. So any questions that you have, jot them down, pop them in the chat box, but please be prepared to have some discussion at the end. Okay. As I said, it was really tough to really condense down this conversation, but these are the things that we are seeing and hearing from event organisers around regional and rural Australia. And even it's not even really unique to regional and rural Australia. I would say event organisers around the country, if not around the world, are struggling with some really significant challenges at the moment. And it's really, I guess what we're seeing is those events that are able to adapt and evolve and actually turn these challenges into opportunities and even reimagine a little bit are those that are setting up for future success. Unfortunately, what we're also seeing is, and it's quite sad when we see it, is this constant kind of messaging or announcements coming out in the media of events that are not happening. They're cancelled. You can see a couple on the screen right now. Tunarama in Port Lincoln in South Australia. So that was an event that ceased last year. I never know what day it is, let alone what year, so forgive me. But recently, however, I guess they're in a fortunate situation where council's actually jumped in and undergoing a revitalisation process for that event at the moment. But, a long-standing event like that, comes to an end. It's quite significant in terms of its impact on that regional community. Other events like Tennant Creek Show, like we've seen a lot of agricultural shows over the last 5 or so years just not be able to continue because of resourcing challenges, finances, even infrastructure challenges as well. Even big festivals are struggling. So, Kath was saying to me this morning, I haven't seen it yet, but there's been a recent announcement that Groove and the Moo, which is a music festival, they've had to cancel a series of their regional shows 2 months prior to the festival due to a lack of ticket sales and the constant struggle of increased costs. So we're seeing this a lot, and I'm sure that many of you have heard of similar situations. And I guess what our whole passion is and purpose is, how do we actually support these events to actually work through this? And it's not easy, I will say that, but there's certainly some things that can be done to shift that. So some of the things that we're hearing, these 4 on the screen, these are the constants that are consistently coming up, is this challenge around how do we remain fresh and relevant? It's really hard for events to, invest in that continual improvement. If we think about point 2 and 3, when we talk about lack of volunteering, financial viability and having the finances to actually cope with increasing costs, etc., that creates extra pressure, which means, it's hard to remain fresh. It's hard to remain relevant. It's hard to have the energy to actually do that. So we're seeing many events that are really just a bit of a rinse and repeat. And as a result, they're losing relevance and they're losing their competitive edge. As I said, point 2 and 3 would be the top of the list all the time for us. When somebody comes to us wanting to talk about challenges around their events, these are the 2 that come up. Volunteering. We have a lack of volunteers. Our volunteers are burnt out. There's fatigue within our volunteers. And this isn't just unique to volunteers, it's also with skilled staff, and particularly post-COVID. There was a lot of people that left the events industry, a lot of skilled people that left the events industry in the entire supply chain. So it's even a lack of skilled staff. Financial viability, we're in a tough climate at the moment. And for events, we have been for a while. So it's kind of been this domino of post-COVID. Now we've got cost of living that's, impacting disposable income. And that's one of the reasons Groove and the Moo has had to cancel in regional Australia. We've got increasing costs. We've got reduction in grants. I'm not sure if many are seeing that, but there's absolutely a reduction in grants available for events, which all of these things are just making it harder to run a financially viable event. And then we've got the good old succession planning, and we see this a lot. And a lot of these points are actually linked. But what we see is that for all of those reasons that I've just mentioned, a lot of events don't have the capacity or the skill to put in place good planning and documented systems and processes. So what that means is they're having to duplicate things every year, or a lot of information is in their head, so it's hard to hand the event over to somebody else. So rather than the event being handed over, it's just easier for the event to end. So there's this real need to put in place really smart succession planning strategies in order for events to have that longevity and exist beyond the current team. So they're kind of the 4 points I want to talk about over the next 20 minutes. But before we do that, I'd love you just to think about this and put your response in the chat box. Think about your own community. Think about events that you work on or events that you're familiar with. What are the current trends and challenges that you're seeing? What are the things that are impacting you? Jump into the chat box. It'll be really interesting for you all to see what everybody's dealing with at the moment and where there's some common themes. And I'm going to come back to that when we do the chat and just see if there's anything that's come up, or Kath will be keeping an eye on it as well to see if there's anything that we haven't heard yet that we might want to address in the chat or Q&A at the end. All right. Let's not talk all about the challenges because it's a bit depressing, to be honest. Events are hard work. They're resource intensive. We know that, but they are so amazing. There's a reason why there's so many people interested in today's webinar, because events have so many great positive impacts in our community, right? They bring new money in. They connect our community. They generate community pride. They They are just so fabulous in terms of the positive benefits that events can have in our communities. So what we want to talk about is, how do we actually turn those challenges into opportunities? How can you actually optimize your community events? How can you make sure that they have that longevity? So I'm going to just go back and talk about each of those 4 points that I've raised in terms of the big challenges impacting events. And I'm going to share with you, I guess, just a bit more insight into what we're seeing. But more importantly, I want to offer some tips and also inspire you with some case studies and some great examples of what we're seeing across regional Australia from events that are actually working really hard to try to overcome these challenges. So remaining fresh and relevant. I'm sure this would resonate with many of you. This tension, right? This tension of, you have to remain relevant, but often it's just having the energy and the capacity to remain relevant, because sometimes it's just easier to do what we did last year, right? The problem with that is you lose that, I guess, interest from your attendees. If it's the same every year, and you think about events that you attend, if they're the same every year, it's just, after a while, you're like, why do we keep going? It's the same thing. So we have this pressure as event organisers to actually continually renew and refresh and rethink our event. So what I wanted to share with you now is, we call these, I guess, macro trends or forces shaping events. So these are bigger picture things. So the thing that you need to do is, when you think about how do I remain fresh and relevant, is you have to step outside your own bubble. You have to think about what's happening in the big picture. What's impacting decision-making of people attending events? What's impacting the industry? Why do people want to attend events? What can I do with my event to be on trend, to be really fresh? You can see on the screen right now, these are things that come up for us all the time. The first one I've kind of talked about, which is this building pressures. Like, events are risky, they're increasingly competitive, and as I said, they're resource intensive. So yes, this makes it even harder to invest in continual improvement and to remain fresh, but we have to be mindful of that. We have to be really smart in how we're organising our events. The second point is quality over quantity. And this one's always really interesting. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because we're seeing so many big events, like mass gathering, thousands of people, really struggling in terms of, extra compliance, extra costs. It's almost like the bigger you get, the harder it is. So I challenge you to think about quality over quantity, and it's not always about more people. Sometimes we get caught in this frame of mind, and perhaps it's governed by KPIs around grants, or I'm not sure, but we get caught in this frame of mind that, success is how many people come. So think about quality over quantity. And even from a local government perspective, so those of you joining from a local government perspective, often what we say to councils is, it's not always about more events in the calendar. Invest in what you already have and enhance the quality of the event and the quality of the experience that you're offering. And think about, can you get more value out of less people? And I often think about, this terminology that farmers use around yield over volume. This is essentially what it's about. It's a numbers game. Sometimes when you have more people, it becomes harder to run, it becomes more expensive. Have a smaller event that's a higher quality event that perhaps you can charge a little bit more for, really special experiences. Travel with purpose, or this term conscious travellers. Now, this is a trend. Actually, you know what? It's not a trend. It's probably just becoming a necessity. And we've reached this point where a lot of people are really conscious of the impact their travel and decision-making has on the environment. There was some research done that showed 3/4 of travellers are seeking sustainable options. So there's lots of research coming out from a tourism perspective, but it is exactly the same for events. So there's this growing expectation that your event will be responsible. So we've got to think about that with our events. I know that makes it even harder. It's another thing to think about, right? But it's so important. So when we're thinking about how do we keep our event fresh and relevant, we need to be thinking like our attendees. What's important to them? And that's something that's becoming universally important, particularly for younger people. Climate change sits in that same kind of bucket. You know, it's becoming more and more important for people in making decisions about how they travel and things that they actively participate in. We're also seeing this trend around active lifestyles and health and well-being, which is great. People are really embracing healthier lifestyles. You know, there's this real desire to maintain physical and mental health. So you think about that and you're probably going, well, what does that mean for my event? Unless I'm like a sporting event or a triathlon or something like that. But it's thinking about, you know, healthy food options and what are you doing to actually embrace that for your attendees. And the last one there, once again, I wouldn't say this is a trend. It's absolutely something that is really important to every event today, is that our events should reflect the diversity of our community. So inclusion is really important when we're thinking about our events, and accessibility. So that's just kind of, I could talk about this for a long time in terms of trends, but I just wanted to share with you some of the things that we're seeing. You may have others that you're seeing on a local level as well. The important thing is that you recognise these. And not all of them may be appropriate to your event, but you need to recognise those that are and think about, how does that impact my event? Is that important to my attendees? And what can I do to embrace that as an opportunity? I'm going to give you a little tip now. First of all, before I talk about this 15%, which I love, the most important thing for you to do in terms of, reimagining or even just keeping your event fresh is to ask your attendees what they want. That sounds so simple. And you're probably thinking, I'm sitting in this webinar and she's telling me to just ask people what they want. I am. So many people overlook this and get caught in, their own little bubble. So you've got to do that post-event review process. You've got to ask people, what is it that they want? What could we do different? What could we do better? Also look at benchmarking. So look at what other events are doing, whether that be in your local area, your state, Australia-wide, or even globally. Be inspired by what others are doing. Find some events that are similar to yours, perhaps in other areas, and follow what they do. Connect and engage with them. And then finally, the 15% rule. This is not mine. I can't claim that this is my tip or strategy, but I worked with the Gameri Pumpkin Festival in Queensland a few years ago, and this, to me, was like this absolute golden nugget. They have what they call a 15% rule. So what they do every year after their event, they do their post-event review process, they analyse all their feedback and data and determine what people are suggesting, because you'll get all these radical kind of suggestions, right? Their policy or strategy is every single year the event has to have 15% new content. So what that means is they look at their program and they go, okay, we've got to look at 15% new for next year's event. That could be, introducing a new element into the program. It could be taking an element out of the program or really rethinking an element within the program. It could be retheming something. So they look really closely at the experience that they're offering and they make sure they've got 15% new content within that program. How cool is that? So what that does is every year there's a little bit, because I guess the key for that is when I say reimagine and remain relevant, I don't expect you to change your whole event. So that idea of going, okay, 15%, we could do that. It may be 10% for you. You may have a different figure in your mind. I think the key is every single year you should be looking at some element of new and freshness based on the feedback that you've got. All right, let's move into volunteering. Challenge number 2. So volunteering or human resourcing in general, as I said, is a real challenge, particularly for events. We're resource intensive, right? We can't automate everything. You know, it requires physical labour to deliver successful events. There's so many things to be done. As I mentioned before, I would say that this would be the number one challenge. It's hard to know which is probably number one, this one or finances, probably both of them together, particularly for community events. And we often hear, you know, we don't have enough volunteers. The young people in our community just aren't volunteering. Or older volunteers are not open to change and won't accept younger people in. You know, we hear all of these things around challenges with volunteering. What's really interesting is volunteering has changed. And I honestly just don't think that we're adapting to the changes that have taken place in society around volunteering. So we need to think different about volunteering. Volunteering Australia did a whole heap of research, and if you haven't seen that, jump onto the Volunteering Australia website. There is a whole heap of research that they released last year on volunteering, why people volunteer, what motivates people to volunteer, why they don't volunteer. One of the things that came out of that, which I think is super critical for events, is this term that they call casual volunteering. What casual volunteering means is that, and sorry, I should say first of all, it actually identified that people are more interested in casual volunteering than they are in permanent volunteering roles. What that means is people are prepared to volunteer, but they only want to volunteer when they know it starts here and it ends here. And there's a very clear understanding of what that role is and how long it goes for. So they call it casual volunteering. So I look at an event and I go, you know, if volunteering on the gate at your event for 3 hours on event day would be casual volunteering, as opposed to joining your committee and being part of the entire planning stage of your event, which I would see as more permanent volunteering, because you don't know when it's going to end in most cases. You're kind of signing up for life. So there's this real interesting shift where people are more interested in casual volunteering, and you're probably seeing that with your events. It's easier to get volunteers to actually come and help on the day of the event, to do a specific role in a specific shift, but it's hard to get people to commit to the committee, right? That's what we're seeing. So these are some tips. You can see them on the screen right now. You need to know what you need. There we go again, Linda with her simple tips. But you need to know what you need. And what I mean by that is you've got to have a really clear structure and roles that are defined and clearly defined start and end times. I guess what we don't want to see, or we want to try to avoid, is that blanket kind of plea for volunteers. You know, when you get desperate and you're like, oh my God, and you put something out in the newspaper or on Facebook saying, we need 50 volunteers for our event. Come on, everybody, get together and help us out. I'm not saying that doesn't work. It will bring some people out, but that's what we need to shift away from and start to think, what do we actually need? So break your event down into small roles or portfolios, or what I like to say is small chunks. And Kath will be having a laugh at that. But so you think about the event, you go, this is event planning of Linda's Festival. How do you break that down into smaller chunks? So it's not just planning Linda's Festival, it's, you know, the music, and the stage. It's organising the food trucks. It's, you know, managing the gate. It's running the bar. It's, you know, you kind of start to break it down, and you break it down even further. So you're really starting to break it down into small roles. So you'll start to really quickly see where you need people and the types of people that you need. It takes a bit of work to do this, but once you do it once, it's done. You don't have to do it every year. It sets up a really good, clear structure for your event. What it then enables you to do is have a really targeted approach to recruitment. I've seen this work so many times. rather than actually do that blanket plea that I mentioned, you know, we need 50 volunteers. Actually, once you know what you need, you can identify people within your community and actually go and have a coffee with them, or go and sit down and say, look, we need someone to, you know, look after the Facebook for our event. We know that you're really good on Facebook. You know, it'd probably be an hour a week, and you give them that information and more specific detail, and the response rate is going to be much higher than just saying, we need 50 people to come and help our event, because they don't really know what they're in for. The other thing to remember is retention is much easier than recruitment. So you have to look after your volunteers. So really think about simple things like celebrating their birthday, you know, acknowledging them for their efforts. And another one that we don't often think about is, even if volunteers are playing a small role in the event, make sure they feel valued. And you can do that by asking them to contribute to the bigger picture. So continually ask them for feedback on the entire event. Give them opportunities to contribute, and they feel like they're part of it. They're not just here doing this little role, but they're part of it and they're contributing, and what they contribute is really valuable. There's a whole thing, I mean, that's all about leadership and managing teams and that, you know, that kind of skill set. So there's a lot in that. But essentially, if you can retain the volunteers that you have, and you've got less volunteers or fewer volunteers that are really productive and passionate, it's going to be easier to manage than having, you know, double the number of volunteers that are running around a little bit chaotic, not really knowing what they're doing. So it comes down to structure. A bit of a case study I wanted to share with you, and this is more relevant from a council perspective, but I encourage people, you know, to have this conversation with other events within your area and your council, because every event struggles with volunteers. So don't try to manage this problem on your own. This is where we have conversations with council about taking a lead to support events within their entire community. And this is an example. Western Downs Regional Council in Queensland, they introduced a volunteering program. So essentially this is all about, they wanted to work smarter in terms of volunteer recruitment and retention for all of the events within the Western Downs. It's a pretty, I guess, rich events area. So they've got lots of events. So they now have an event volunteer program. And really what they've done is they've built a bank of volunteers or a pool of volunteers to assist events across the Western Downs. To support that, they also created a toolkit on how to manage volunteers that's available for their event organisers. And in that, one of the biggest tips, believe it or not, is the importance of having those clear roles. And they offer templates, etc., in that as well for their events. And they also have volunteers that are local, but also travelling volunteers. So they use it as an opportunity to attract people that are travelling through the region to volunteer at local events as well. Have a look on their website if you're interested in having a look at that. So it's Western Downs, Queensland. You'll find their website and it's under volunteering opportunities. But yeah, Kath, if you have access to that, you might be able to drop it into the chat box for everybody to have a look at. Great way. So work together. Don't think you have to work independently. Get together as a cohort or a group of events and look at how you can create some kind of volunteering model that supports all of your events. Our third one is finances. Look, I think the biggest thing here is, as an event organiser, you have to think like a business, whether it's a community event or not. The big thing that I often see in many communities is this mindset that as a community event, we can't charge people. Or as a community event, we're not charging people. Our event has to be free. We can't charge people. And I really challenge that thinking, because how can you survive? How can you pay your bills constantly if you have no revenue? I know what your answer is to that. Grants. But the other red flag for me is the reliance on government grants and support. It's not sustainable. You really have to think like a business. We have to change that mindset. It's not saying, every event, because I appreciate there's certain events that are really about, could be about disadvantaged people within your community, or, it's an event that is specifically about bringing community together. And if there's a ticket price, they're not going to come. I totally appreciate that. I'm not being ignorant to that. But we have to be thinking, how do we continually be financially viable in the future? And it doesn't necessarily mean every part of your event has to have a ticket or some kind of monetary value. You can have free community components, and then you can have ticketed elements. So it's just thinking a little bit different. So really change the mindset around not-for-profit and community, and think and operate like a business. So it's almost like getting this balance. My other piece of advice is you do need to reduce the dependence on government. And that can be scary. Like, we do boot camps around regional Australia, and we often say to events, we say, okay, imagine your budget right now, or get a pen and paper out. Think about the line items in your budget and the revenue in your budget. Now what we want you to do is remove government grants from revenue. What does that do to your bottom line? Think about that. If you took grants out altogether, what would that do to your bottom line? Because it's not guaranteed, right? Grants are never guaranteed. That's really important to remember. So we talk about, you've got your own revenue streams that you own, and you have borrowed or third-party revenue streams, because that's not guaranteed. So we need to start to reduce the reliance on that. It has a role to play, absolutely, and we need to start to increase our own revenue streams. In the current climate, that's not easy. I appreciate that, but we've got to just change that thinking. So think about your own revenue streams. And like I said before, it doesn't mean you just have to have, put a big fence around your event and charge a ticket to come in. Have a look at what other events are doing. They're being quite smart, and you can have free community elements, and then ticketed elements, and you can have VIP experiences, and, all different types of things that make up your event, but enable you to bring in revenue through a user pay model. So it's that quality over quantity as well. People will pay for quality experiences. So thinking about, like I was saying before, around that yield and value, are you getting the maximum yield from attendees at your event? And obviously this depends on the type of people coming to your event, but is there the opportunity to increase value from them? And I'd also encourage, there's other models out there. So there's also, we like this idea of having dispersed model events, where you've got, you don't just have your event in one location. You might have all these different events happening across the place. You might have different community groups or businesses within your region organising events, and they all fit under the umbrella of your event. And you can consider things like marketing contributions, where commercial businesses run events as part of your overarching festival, and they contribute a fee as part of the marketing contribution, which I've seen work in many areas. In terms of a case study, I love using this one because I just think it ticks so many boxes for me. When we talk about finances, I talked before about having, VIP type experiences. So the Mount Isa Rodeo, I've just realised I'm using lots of Queensland examples for obvious reasons. Apologies, everybody not from Queensland. But if anyone else has other great examples, please share them in the chat box. Mount Isa Rodeo, they actually added additional experiences to generate new revenue. It was also to build on the experience, but it was an opportunity as well to generate revenue. So this is an example of you not having to just have a ticketed event or not. You can actually offer a mix. I know Mount Isa Rodeo is pay to get in, but they do this as a VIP experience, and it sells out every year because it is on trend, and it's giving people, an immersive experience where they get to go behind the chutes with a retired cowboy and really get to see what it's like behind there, the energy, you know, and meet the cowboys and see what it feels like. And they pay a premium price to have that additional experience. So really interesting to see, you know, what events are doing in terms of adding VIP experiences. I'm going to just go through this quickly because I am conscious of time, but succession planning is our last point. And what I wanted to ask, I'm not sure if the poll is going to work for us. This technology. Oh, it's already up. Good job. Look at that. I'd love everybody just to take 30 seconds to answer this question. If you had to step away from your role in your event tomorrow for whatever reason, could someone else step in and take over? Yes, they could do it easily. No way. Everything's in my head. Yes, but it would not be seamless. And I was actually generous putting that third option in there. I wasn't going to. And if anyone has any comments of that, I'd love you to put it into the chat box. This is a question that really gets events thinking, you know, when we're talking to events in boot camps, it's like, what would happen? Because this is one of the big challenges around succession planning is a lot of stuff we keep in our head. You know, we're often thinking, oh, I'll document that later, or it's just easier for me to do it rather than to ask somebody else to do it. And then we get to this point where so much is not documented that if something did happen, it would be really hard for someone to step in and pick up that event. All right, well, I'm going to stop it there so we can see 18% said yes, easily. Big congratulations to you guys. Awesome work. That means you're doing a great job at documenting processes and systems, and you can probably just have a little nap for the next couple of minutes while I do this next slide. 5% are saying, no way, it's all in my head. Thank you for being honest. And, you know, I think that you've definitely got some work to do, but there's some great strategies for you to put in place in terms of, you know, preparing to have somebody else come into your event. Yes, but it would not be seamless, 76%. So a lot of you have said maybe you've got some stuff documented, you know, maybe it's a little bit outdated, and we see this all the time, but it's so important for us. Sorry, I just realised I hadn't shared the results of that, but you can see that on the screen right now. So a lot of you are in this yes, but it would not be seamless category. Thank you for sharing that. Now, the reason I asked this question, as I said, is because it really is about documenting everything and having in place good systems and processes. I often think about events, like it's not rocket science to organise an event, but it's a lot of work and it's stressful and there's a lot of moving parts. We use this analogy of spinning plates. You imagine somebody with like 10 spinning plates in the circus, right? That's what it's like to organise an event. You've got all of these things going on around you, you know, and if one falls, everything comes crashing down. So that's why it's so important to have good systems, good processes, and good documentation. So really document everything. And this is a process you should go through. Document everything. Once again, once it's done once, you don't have to keep doing it. But having, you know, good event management plans, a really good team structure, timelines with key dates and deadlines, and look at where you can use technology to enhance efficiencies. And this is an example, San Remo down in Victoria, yay, not Queensland. They went through a process last year where they went and they revitalised their entire event and they documented everything. And they got the most people on their committee that they've ever had because everything was in order. Yes, the event was fresh and exciting, but they had everything documented and systems and strategies in place to improve efficiencies. So I really encourage you to think about, what do I need to do in order to be able to step away and let this event live on forever? And that's all I have for you today. But I appreciate time, and I'm so sorry, I always talk too much. But I'd love just to see, Catherine, were there any really key questions that have come up in the chat box that we could address?
Look, Linda, there's some really, really good discussion going on in the chat box, and the people are responding to each other, which is really wonderful. And it was good to see a lot about the challenges and the comments that were coming through. It was mainly around volunteering and finances, but there was still some other good ones I just wanted to bring up, but I actually don't want to waste time for questions. But there were things about the effect of COVID and how people aren't are committing to, sorry, I'll just actually find, post-COVID people are more conscious of slowing down and not attending every event. And lack of understanding, this was one of my favourites, is how much time events cost and the time and resourcing to put them on. So I think there were lots of good comments in there, and I'd encourage everyone to go back and look through them because there were some really good hints.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, that's an interesting one. If anyone has questions, feel free to pop your hand up and we can unmute you. Sorry if I'm taking over the Q&A here. That point about people not really appreciating, I hear that a lot. I don't have an answer or a solution for that other than, just continually sharing, and we need to make people aware of how much is involved and the cost of running events, and, do what we can to really stick together and support one another and really make more people aware of what goes into running an event, because it is a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of money.
There was another good comment and statement regarding we don't have enough people to break down even into roles even on the day. And this is, again, another comment, and I guess my response to that would be sometimes breaking it into really small roles will attract other people, but if you are simply in the place where you don't have the population to support that, that's when you have to look at streamlining your event and only taking on the capacity of what you actually can do.
Yeah, good one, Kath. Yeah.
Linda, there's also a question in regards to a template for an event management plan. Is there anything that you can recommend there, any tools online or otherwise that might be helpful for people?
Yeah, we absolutely, and at risk of self-promotion, we do have a lot of tools and resources, and we do have event management plan templates. So yeah, happy to talk to anybody about that, but also just look online or talk to your council as well. I also find a lot of councils have great resources and tools. So I would do that first, chat to your council, because also often councils have their own style of event management plan in terms of what their requirements are to consider. So I would definitely chat to your council, do some searching online. Event people are also so generous, in terms of sharing. So ask other people. We also have a free Facebook group. It's called Regional Events Hub, and that's a really good resource. So you can join that for free, and there's people that are in regional events all over the country that share information on there. And I find that's a really good place to go. And you could say, for example, in that instance, you could put in there, I'm looking for a template to do an event management plan. Does anybody have any suggestions? And people will come to you and go, hey, I've got this, or check out this link. Or so check with council, join the Facebook group or other Facebook groups and ask other people for their advice. And yeah, you can also tap into what we have to offer as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's some awesome tips. This one might be good for that Facebook group as well. Liz Hill has on the Q&A, destination highway events, tourists that travel from A to B, which drive past our community or stay overnight, how to capture these in the timeline of their journey west or back east. I don't know if there's a quick answer to that one, but
that's hard. That all comes down to timing. It makes me think of Big Red Bash in Birdsville, and God, no, I've just had a mind blank. Charleville, which is kind of, they are halfway between Brisbane and Birdsville. So what they do is they organise an event called Halfway There Shindig. So cool. And essentially they time that, knowing the travel patterns of people coming out of Brisbane or the East Coast, travelling out to Birdsville, to capture them as they're making that trip and encourage them to stay a night in Charleville to spend money and enjoy their community. It's a really great example, like similar to what that question is referring to. I guess it comes down to timing and travel patterns. And sometimes the travel patterns of those tourists can differ. But I guess it will also come down to marketing. If you vaguely know the timing, pick a date and get the word out there, because they'll plan around it. So if you've got a date and you've got a great experience to offer, promote it as, stop on your travels, enjoy this event. They will stay because they're looking for things to do. But check out what Charleville do. It's awesome. Halfway There Shindig. I hope they still do it. This was a couple of years ago. Such a great idea. Very clever.
There is another question in there from Tiffany. How do you balance your time as a sole event coordinator running a large event and catering to your volunteer needs? My answer to that, Linda, and then if you want to add on to it, is in that case, I would actually try and get a volunteer event coordinator. So try and actually get someone to help you that specifically looks after your volunteer teams. And some of the larger events like Denny Ute Muster have done that really successfully.
Yeah, I think you've answered that, Kath. A lot of value in having someone manage your volunteers. It's a big job, but if it's done well, it's so powerful for your event. All right. I feel like we've exhausted everybody.
Thank you, Linda. That was absolutely fantastic. Just so wonderful to be able to benefit from your huge experience and knowledge base. So really appreciate you and Kathy taking the time to chat to everyone today. As a reminder, and we will be sending around a recording of today, so look out for that in your inbox and feel free to share with others that perhaps weren't able to make it. And yeah, just really appreciate the Tilma Group being here with us today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.